Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Christopher Blake had seen enough missing persons cases in his 20 years with North Cascades Search and Rescue to recognize the pattern. Young hiker, solo expedition, last contact 3 days ago, family frantic. Another statistic waiting to happen in the unforgiving wilderness of Washington's most brutal national park. What he hadn't expected was the way Station Chief Margaret Chen's voice had cracked on the radio that morning, or the fact that she'd requested him specifically. The October wind carried the smell of pine and something else as he parked his truck at the Cascade Pass trailhead. Something organic and wrong, like meat left too long in a warm freezer. Christopher dismissed it immediately. 20 years had taught him that panic made people imagine things. He'd heard dozens of hikers swear they'd seen Bigfoot, heard phantom voices, felt presences in the woods. Every single time the explanation had been mundane. Shadows, wind, fear playing tricks on amateur outdoorsmen who'd watched too many horror movies. Emma Rodriguez's file sat on his passenger seat. 23, PhD candidate in forest ecology from University of Washington, researching fungal networks in old-growth forests. Her last satellite phone check-in had come from coordinates near Thunder Creek, elevation 7,000 feet. She'd reported unusual temperature drops and equipment malfunctions, but had insisted on continuing her research. That had been 72 hours ago. Christopher loaded his pack with practiced efficiency. Garmin GPS, Motorola two-way radio, first aid kit, emergency bivouac, 3 days of rations. The sky threatened rain, typical for this region in October, but the forecast had been specific. Clear skies for the next 48 hours. He'd learned to trust meteorology more than instinct. The trail began easily enough, wide and well-maintained through second-growth forest. Christopher maintained his usual pace, covering ground quickly, eyes scanning for the obvious signs most amateur searchers missed. Broken branches at shoulder height, disturbed earth, fabric snagged on bark. Nothing presented itself in the first 2 miles. At mile marker 3, the trail narrowed. The forest here was older, the canopy thick enough to dim the midday sun to twilight. Christopher checked his GPS. On track, making good time. Emma's last known position was still 4 miles ahead, up through increasingly difficult terrain. That's when he noticed the trees. They weren't damaged exactly, but something had stripped bark from them in long, vertical tiers, exposing pale wood underneath. Too high for deer, too systematic for bear. Christopher knelt to examine the marks more closely. The tiers ran 10, 12 feet up the trunks, and the wood beneath showed deep gouges, as if something with immense strength had simply peeled the bark away like paper. His radio crackled. "Blake, this is Chen. What's your 20? Mile 3 on Cascade Pass found some unusual tree damage, might be nothing." A pause that lasted too long. "What kind of damage?" "Bark stripped, big sections. Could be disease, maybe some kind of environmental stress." Christopher, Chen's use of his first name made him pause. She never did that on the job. "When you find Emma's campsite, I need you to document everything before you touch anything. Everything. Do you understand?" "Margaret, what aren't you telling me?" Another pause. "The local ranger station got a call 2 days ago. Tribal police from the Sauk-Seattle Reservation. They said..." She stopped. "They said someone reported hearing the Whitticow." Christopher felt irritation tighten his jaw. "We're doing this, really? I'm out here searching for a missing person and you're bringing up folklore?" "I'm just telling you what was reported." "The Wendigo isn't real, Margaret. It's a story the Algonquian peoples told to discourage cannibalism during harsh winters. Cultural prohibition wrapped in myth. We've been through this. I know what you think. Just document everything." Christopher continued up the trail, his irritation becoming a low simmer. This was exactly the kind of superstitious thinking that led searches astray. People saw what they expected to see, heard what they'd been told to fear. The woods were full of rational explanations for strange sounds and unusual animal behavior. Interference from magnetic fields could cause equipment failures. Temperature inversions created acoustic anomalies. The human brain, when stressed and alone, was perfectly capable of generating hallucinations without any supernatural assistance. The temperature dropped as he gained elevation. Not gradually, as it should with altitude, but suddenly, like walking into a freezer. Christopher's breath became visible in seconds. His GPS read 53 degrees, but the air felt 20 degrees colder. He checked the device, tapped it twice. The reading held steady even as frost began forming on his jacket collar. Malfunction. Had to be. Emma had reported equipment problems in her last transmission. The stripped trees became more frequent. Christopher documented them with his camera, though he couldn't explain the pattern. The damage formed rough circles, as if something had orbited the trunks in a spiral, tearing away bark methodically as it climbed. Some trees showed claw marks, but the spacing was wrong for any animal he knew. Too wide, too deep. At mile 6, he found the first cairn. It wasn't on any trail map. Stones stacked deliberately, maybe 4 feet high, in the middle of the path. Around its base, someone had scattered what looked like tobacco and cedar. Christopher photographed it from multiple angles before carefully dismantling it to continue. As he moved the top stone, something rolled free. A piece of paper, wrapped in plastic to protect it from weather. The message was written in pencil, the handwriting shaky. "Wheaty cow, do not camp near water, do not follow voices, it knows your hunger." Christopher crumpled the paper. Deliberate psychological warfare, probably left by some survivalist playing games with hikers. Or perhaps Emma herself, succumbing to isolation and the documented effects of solo wilderness exposure. Auditory hallucinations were common in extreme isolation. The brain, desperate for stimulation, created input where none existed. Thunder Creek came into view as the sun began its descent. Christopher checked his watch. 3:14 p.m. Emma's last coordinates placed her campsite somewhere along this stretch of water. The creek ran fast and loud here, swollen from recent rain in the high country, and the sound of it filled the forest with white noise that made other sounds impossible to distinguish. He found her camp at 3:47. The tent was still standing, but the camp showed signs of hasty abandonment. Emma's sleeping bag lay half out of the tent, as if she'd dragged it while trying to extract herself quickly. Her cooking gear sat scattered around a cold fire pit. The bear canister that should have held her food lay open and empty 20 feet away, though its locking mechanism showed no signs of forcing. Christopher called it in. "Chen, I've found the campsite. Subject not present. Signs of possible distress. Describe the scene." He walked the perimeter as he spoke. Tent intact, but camp disrupted. Food stores empty. Personal items scattered. No signs of struggle exactly, but the pattern suggests rapid departure. I'm seeing her field notes, research equipment, camera. She left without her essential gear. Any blood? Negative. No apparent violence. Christopher knelt by the cold fire pit. The ashes were at least 2 days old. But Margaret, the fire's been out for a while. If she left in a hurry, it wasn't last night. Keep looking. And Christopher? Stay on the radio. Check in every 30 minutes. The light was failing faster than it should. Christopher glanced at his watch again. 4:03 p.m. Sunset wasn't for another 2 hours, but the forest had grown dark, the canopy seeming to thicken overhead. He activated his headlamp and began a systematic search of the area. Emma's field notebook lay open beside the tent, its pages rippled with moisture. Christopher photographed each page, squinting at her handwriting. The early entries were methodical, professional observations about mycorrhizal networks and soil composition. But the later entries changed tone. October 19th. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in less than an hour. All 3 thermometers showing different readings. Compass spinning. Local magnetic anomaly. Need to investigate geological surveys. October 20th. Something large circled the camp last night. Didn't see it, but heard it moving through the brush. Breathing pattern unusual, very slow, Very deep, like a human, but wrong somehow. Probably elk, though they don't usually come this close to human habitation. October 20th, later, found tracks, six-toed, human-sized, but the gait is wrong. Stride length suggests something at least 7 feet tall. This doesn't match any known wildlife in the region. Taking plaster casts. October 21st, early morning. It spoke to me. Or something did. Heard my mother's voice calling from the trees. But my mother died 6 years ago. The voice was perfect, exactly how she sounded. Called my name 3 times. I know it's not real. I know auditory hallucinations are common in isolation, but it knew things, private things, things only she would know. October 21st, evening. The hunger is worse. I've eaten everything in my bear canister, but I'm still starving. Physically painful. Makes no sense. I had over 3,000 calories today, hands shaking. Need to get out tomorrow. Something is fundamentally wrong here. The final entry was barely legible, written in what looked like charcoal. It has my face. Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach and immediately pushed it away. Hypothermia could cause confusion, disorientation, hallucinations. Emma's symptoms aligned perfectly with moderate hypothermia combined with isolation-induced psychosis. The rapid temperature drop she'd documented would have been dangerous, especially if her equipment was malfunctioning and she couldn't trust her thermometer readings. He needed to establish a search pattern while light remained. Emma had left without her gear, which meant she was likely disoriented, hypothermic, and vulnerable. Every hour that passed decreased her survival odds. Christopher activated his radio. Chen, subject likely suffering from exposure and possible hypothermia-induced psychosis. Field notes indicate severe physiological distress. I'm going to do a preliminary sweep in widening circles from the campsite, then establish base camp here for the night. Negative, Blake. I want you back at the trailhead before dark. That's not protocol. Search window is critical in hypothermia cases. Christopher. That tone again, the one that meant she was about to say something he wouldn't like. We got another call from tribal police. They're asking us to pull out. They want to handle this themselves. On what grounds? This is federal parkland. They cited treaty rights and cultural sovereignty. They're claiming this falls under traditional law enforcement. Christopher's laugh was harsh. Let me guess. Because they think a mythological cannibal spirit is involved? I'm not arguing the merits. I'm telling you the political reality. If we push this and something goes wrong, it becomes an incident. I need you to do a quick perimeter sweep and then pack out. We'll coordinate with tribal authorities tomorrow. A woman is dying out here, Margaret. A woman who documented progressive psychological collapse in her field notes. If she's already deceased, one more night won't matter. If she's alive, we've got tribal Sayar who know this terrain better than anyone coordinating the search tomorrow. This isn't a discussion, Christopher. You have until sunset to complete your sweep, then you're pulling out. That's an order. Christopher didn't respond immediately. He scanned the darkening forest, weighing protocol against instinct. Finally, acknowledged. Beginning perimeter sweep now. He started in concentric circles from the campsite, headlamp beam cutting through the gloom. The forest had gone silent, he realized. No bird calls, no insect sounds, nothing but the roar of Thunder Creek and his own breathing. That was unusual but not unprecedented. Wildlife often went quiet before storms, responding to barometric pressure changes humans couldn't sense. 50 yards from camp, he found the first piece of clothing. Emma's fleece jacket, torn but not by any animal he recognized. The tears were clean, precise, as if the fabric had been simply pulled apart along its fibers. Christopher bagged it as evidence and continued. The smell hit him at 70 yards. That same wrong meat odor from the trailhead, but stronger now, thick enough to taste. Christopher breathed through his mouth and pushed forward. He'd smelled decomposition before, helped recover bodies from the backcountry. This was similar but different. Sweeter somehow. More complex. At 90 yards, he found the deer, or what was left of it. The carcass had been torn open and partially consumed, but the damage pattern was wrong. Predators, cougars, bears, Coyotes, fed in predictable ways. They opened the body cavity to access organs, broke bones to reach marrow. This deer had been systematically stripped, its meat removed in long sections almost surgical in precision. The bones that remained showed strange scoring, parallel grooves that ran lengthwise, as if something had dragged teeth along them while pulling away flesh. But the worst part was the deer's face. Its lips had been torn away to expose teeth frozen in what looked like a scream. And its eyes. Christopher had to look away and back twice to confirm what he was seeing. The eyes had been removed and placed on nearby rocks, positioned to face the direction of Emma's campsite. He photographed everything, but his hands shook slightly as he worked. This was deliberate arrangement, human agency, some kind of twisted trophy display or threatening message, which meant whoever had taken Emma wasn't a random opportunist. This was planned, ritual, specific. The temperature dropped again, so suddenly Christopher gasped. His breath came out in thick clouds now, and frost formed on his camera lens. He checked his GPS. 48 degrees. Impossible. His exposed skin burned with cold, his fingers already numbing. That's when he heard his daughter's voice. "Daddy? Daddy, I'm cold." Sarah, 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, dead in a car accident 3 years ago. The voice was perfect, exactly how she'd sounded, with that slight lisp on her S's that the speech therapist had been working on. Christopher froze, every rational part of his brain screaming that this was impossible, that he was experiencing exactly what Emma had documented. "Daddy, please, it's so cold here. Why won't you come find me?" The voice came from deeper in the forest, past the torn deer, into the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach. Christopher's throat had closed. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Part of him knew, absolutely knew, that this was a trick, an auditory hallucination, some combination of stress and isolation and maybe carbon monoxide from his stove or a gas pocket in the ground affecting his brain chemistry. But it was Sarah's voice. "If you loved me, you'd come. Don't you love me anymore?" Christopher's legs were moving before he'd made a conscious decision. He pushed past the deer carcass, into the deeper woods, following the voice. His headlamp beam bounced wildly as he moved, illuminating snapshots of forest. A tree with bark torn away, another cairn of stones, markings scratched into earth. "Closer, Daddy. Just a little closer." He stopped. No, this was wrong. This was exactly what Emma had described. Exactly what the note had warned against. Don't follow voices. Christopher physically forced himself to turn around to retreat back toward the campsite. The sound that came from the darkness behind him wasn't human. It started as a low moan, almost subsonic, a vibration he felt in his chest before he heard it with his ears. Then it rose, climbing in pitch until it became a shriek, but wrong, modulated strangely, as if human vocal cords were being used in ways they weren't designed for. The sound went on impossibly long, no pause for breath, and Christopher heard his daughter's voice woven into it, dozens of other voices layered beneath, all screaming together. He ran. Christopher Blake, who'd prided himself on rational thinking, who'd spent 20 years explaining away supernatural fears with science and logic, ran like a terrified animal through the darkening forest. His headlamp beam jerked wildly, catching glimpses of trees that seemed to lean toward him, of shadows that moved wrong, of something pale and massive keeping pace through the trees just beyond his vision. He burst into Emma's campsite and immediately began packing his gear. His hands fumbled with straps and buckles. The screaming had stopped, but the silence that replaced it was worse. He could feel something watching him, could sense its attention like physical pressure against his skin. The radio crackled. "Blake, this is Chen. Status report. You're past your check-in time." Christopher grabbed the radio, his voice hoarse. "I'm pulling out. Now. Something's wrong here, Margaret." Emma's field notes were... Static swallowed his words. When the signal cleared, Chen's voice sounded distant, distorted. "Say again? You're breaking up. What about Emma's notes?" They were accurate, all of it. The temperature drops, the voice is something out here that... The radio died completely. Christopher checked the battery indicator. Full charge, but the device had simply stopped functioning. Like Emma's equipment. Like his GPS, which he now noticed was displaying nonsense coordinates, placing him somewhere in the middle of Thunder Creek. He was being herded. The realization came with absolute clarity. Whatever was out here had driven Emma away from her camp, just as it was now driving him. But Emma had been alone, confused, hypothermic. Christopher had training, equipment, and most importantly, he now understood what he was dealing with. Not a person, not an animal, but not necessarily supernatural either. There were documented cases of infrasound causing fear responses, hallucinations, nausea. Certain geological formations could produce standing waves of low-frequency sound that affected human psychology. The temperature drops could be explained by localized weather phenomena, maybe cold air drainage from the mountains above. But even as Christopher constructed these explanations, he knew they were inadequate. The deer's arranged eyes, the voice that had perfectly mimicked Sarah, known things only she would know. The breathing sounds Emma had described, the six-toed tracks. These weren't natural phenomena. Movement in the trees. Christopher spun, his headlamp illuminating a shape that his brain refused to process correctly. It was tall, impossibly tall, bent forward at an angle that should have been unstable. Pale skin, or maybe fur, or maybe bark. His eyes couldn't quite focus on it. The thing's face, if it had a face, seemed to shift between human and animal features, never settling on one form. Then it smiled at him with Sarah's mouth. Christopher turned and ran again, this time with purpose. Not down the trail toward safety, but perpendicular to it, into the densest part of the forest. If this thing was hurting him, he'd refuse to be herded. If it expected him to run toward the trailhead, he'd run the opposite direction. Basic counter-predator tactics. The forest closed around him like water. Within minutes, he'd lost all sense of direction. His headlamp caught fragments of scenery, a fallen log, a boulder, a stream he didn't remember crossing. But nothing formed a coherent map in his mind. The cold had deepened until his fingers barely responded, his face numb, his thinking sluggish. He needed shelter. Needed to get warm, to think clearly. Christopher spotted a depression under a fallen cedar, a natural hollow that would provide some protection from wind. He crawled inside, pulling his emergency bivouac around himself, hands shaking too hard to properly deploy it. The thing didn't follow. Or rather, it didn't need to. As Christopher's thinking slowed, as hypothermia began its final work, he understood. The Whitticow didn't chase its prey. It transformed them. Emma hadn't been killed or dragged away. She'd become something else. The hunger started small, a gnawing in his stomach that his rational mind recognized as impossible. He'd eaten his emergency rations less than an hour ago. But the hunger grew anyway, becoming pain, becoming all-consuming need. Christopher's hands moved to his pack, searching for food he knew wasn't there, his movements becoming frantic, animal. His headlamp flickered and died. In the darkness, Christopher heard breathing, the same slow, deep breaths Emma had described, human but wrong. And he realized in the last moment before the hunger took his mind completely that the breathing was his own. His chest was expanding too far, his lungs drawing in air in huge, shuddering gasps. His fingers had lengthened, the joints bending in new directions. And the hunger, the terrible hunger that could never be satisfied, was filling him with something that wasn't quite consciousness anymore. Christopher Blake tried to hold on to his identity, his certainty, his rational explanations. But the forest was old, and the Whitticow was older, and some hungers were stronger than reason. The last thing his human mind registered was the sound of his own voice calling out in the darkness, but the words weren't English. They were Cree, a language he'd never learned but now spoke fluently. Ni Whittikon, Ana Kia Whitticow. I am Whitticow. You are Whitticow. The Soxhawtla tribal police found his truck 3 days later at the Cascade Pass trailhead. keys still in the ignition. They didn't search the forest. They knew better. Instead, they built a new cairn at the trail's entrance, placed tobacco and cedar at its base, and marked the trail closed until further notice. Over the following weeks, other hikers reported strange experiences in that section of the park. Voices calling from the trees, the smell of rot. Massive shapes moving just beyond their vision. 2 more people went missing before the National Park Service finally accepted the tribal recommendation and closed the entire Thunder Creek area indefinitely. Margaret Chen received a formal reprimand for approving a solo search operation, but she never spoke publicly about the last transmission from Christopher Blake's radio. How his voice had changed, how he'd spoken in a language he couldn't possibly know, how he'd said just before the signal died completely, "Tell Sarah I found her. Tell her daddy's not cold anymore." The official report listed Christopher Blake as missing, presumed dead due to exposure. His ex-wife buried an empty casket beside their daughter's grave. But the Soxhawtla elders knew the truth. Some people who go into those woods don't die. They change, they hunger. They call to others in voices that can't be ignored, offering reunion with the dead, promising relief from the cold, whispering that just a little closer, just a few more steps, everything will be warm again. The rangers at North Cascades National Park still maintain the closure. They've stopped explaining why. When pressed, they direct inquiries to the tribal authorities, who simply say that some places remember what lived there first, that some hungers are older than civilization, that the old stories aren't metaphors or moral lessons or cultural artifacts to be analyzed and dismissed. They're warnings. And in the deep wilderness of the North Cascades, where the old growth forest is thick enough to swallow light and sound, where Thunder Creek runs fast and cold and loud enough to cover other sounds, something moves in the darkness. Something that was once a forest ranger named Christopher Blake, and before him a biologist named Emma Rodriguez, and before her, others whose names have been forgotten. They hunger, always hunger, and they call to those who walk alone in the woods. They speak in the voices of the lost, the loved, the mourned, and sometimes when the wind is right and the temperature drops without warning, and the GPS coordinates read impossible locations, someone hears those voices and thinks, just a little closer, just to be sure. That's when the transformation begins again. The forest remembers, the Whitticow remembers, and some types of hunger can never be satisfied, only shared. In his office in Seattle, on a computer that no longer received updates from Christopher Blake's GPS beacon, a file remained open. Emma Rodriguez's field notes, photographed and uploaded on that last day. No one read the final pages carefully enough to notice the pattern in her handwriting, how the letters gradually changed from her neat, educated script into something older, more primitive, more urgent. No one except Margaret Chen, who studied those pages late at night and saw what others missed. How the final entries weren't warnings, they were invitations. "Come find us," they said. "We're so hungry, we're so cold. Come make us warm." Chen closed the file every time, but she never deleted it, because somewhere deep in her rational, scientific mind, a small voice wondered what it would be like to never feel hunger again, to never feel cold, to speak in voices that could call the dead. She never went to North Cascades National Park. She never tried to find Christopher Blake or Emma Rodriguez. But on particularly cold nights, when the wind howled outside her Seattle apartment, she thought she heard something calling her name. Not her voice, someone else's. Someone she'd lost long ago, and every time she had to physically force herself not to respond. The Whitticow are patient. They can wait decades, centuries. They called the Algonquian peoples for thousands of years, and they call still. Not because they're evil or malicious or even consciously cruel. They simply hunger as fire hungers for fuel, as winter hungers for warmth. And hunger, in the end, is the most human thing of all. Sarah Brennan had been staring at the photograph for 20 minutes, and the wrongness of it wouldn't resolve into sense. She sat in the ranger station at Logan Pass, elevation 6,646 feet, while February winds screamed against the windows and turned the parking lot into a white void. The photo showed Daniel Marsh's campsite at the Granite Park Chalet Service Road. His tent, intact, sleeping bag still in its stuff sack, camp stove with half a pot of what looked like oatmeal frozen solid. His pack leaned against a lodgepole pine, fully loaded. His boots sat paired outside the tent vestibule. But Daniel Marsh himself had been found 8 miles north, barefoot in 2 feet of snow at 4:47 a.m. by a snowplow operator clearing the Going to the Sun road. He'd been alive, technically. Hypothermic, frostbitten, unresponsive. When they'd loaded him into the ambulance, his eyes had been open but focused on nothing, and he'd been mouthing words nobody could understand. The hospital in Kalispell had him in intensive care now, still silent, still staring. The oatmeal detail bothered her most. You didn't start cooking breakfast? Leave it half-finished? Strip off your boots and abandon your campsite to walk 8 miles through a blizzard in the dark? The timeline made it worse. His girlfriend had confirmed he'd texted her at 10:47 p.m. saying he was calling it early, snow getting heavy. The snowplow operator's timestamp was 4:47 a.m. 6 hours. The February darkness would have been absolute. The temperature at 12 below zero before wind chill. Sarah had 14 years with the National Park Service, the last 7 at Glacier. She had a master's degree in wildlife biology and a reputation for methodical thinking that made her the de facto person Chief Ranger Morrison called when something didn't add up. She'd tracked down poachers, located confused hikers, investigated bear attacks and avalanche deaths. She understood the mechanics of how people died in the wilderness. This didn't fit any of those mechanics. Her Motorola radio crackled. "Brennan, you copy?" She pressed the transmit button. "Go ahead, Tom." Tom Whitehorse, her usual partner for backcountry work, sounded tense. "Hospital called. Marsh came out of it about 20 minutes ago, started talking." Sarah sat forward. "What's he saying?" "That's the thing. Nurse said it's not English, not French or Spanish either. She recorded some of it on her phone, sent it to Morrison. Chief wants you to hear it." "Send it through." "Can't. Email's down again. Storm knocked out the relay. You need to come to the admin building." Sarah looked at the photograph again. At the boots, precisely placed. At the tent, zipped shut. At the oatmeal pot, its contents crystallized mid-stir. On my way. The Glacier National Park Administrative Building sat 3 miles down from Logan Pass, accessible in winter only by snowmobile or snowcat. Sarah took a snowmobile, and the ride down through the screaming white felt like descending into some pocket dimension where the normal rules didn't apply. The park in winter became something else. Over 1 million acres of frozen wilderness, most of it inaccessible, inhabited only by scattered winter rangers and whatever else moved through the deep snow. Morrison was waiting with Tom when she arrived. The chief ranger was 58, weathered, competent. He didn't spook easily, but there was something tight around his eyes now. He handed Sarah his iPhone without preamble. "Listen to this. Tell me what you think." Sarah pressed play. The recording was scratchy, clearly captured on a phone held near a hospital bed. Background beeps and machinery hum, then a voice, male, hoarse, speaking in a rhythmic monotone. "Widikow, Widikow, Kawashimiu, Nimitikwapan, Widikow." The words repeated, a litany. Sarah felt something cold move through her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd heard Algonquian languages before. There was a Blackfeet reservation bordering the park's eastern edge, and she'd worked with tribal liaisons on joint projects. This sounded similar in phonetic structure, but wrong somehow. The cadence was off. Too rhythmic. Almost chanted. "He's been saying this for 30 minutes straight," Morrison said. "Won't respond to questions. Won't look at anyone. Just this." Tom leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He was Blackfeet himself, 32, practical. "Play it again," he said. Sarah did. This time Tom's expression shifted. Not recognition exactly, but something close to it. Something uncomfortable. "Tom?" Morrison prompted. "It's similar to Blackfoot. Not exactly, but close. Old dialect, maybe." He paused. First word he's saying, "Widikow." That's close to our word for something we don't talk about much. Which is? Sarah asked. Tom looked at her directly. A Wendigo, or Windigo, Widicow, bunch of different spellings. Different tribes have different versions. Algonquian folklore, a winter spirit, cannibal giant, person transformed by eating human flesh in times of starvation. Morrison frowned. Marsh is from Seattle. Software engineer. No connection to any tribal communities that we know of. How would he? He wouldn't, Tom interrupted. That's what bothers me. And the other words. Kawishimu means, it hunts me in Old Blackfoot. Nimitikwapan, that's harder. I ate, maybe? Or I consumed. My grandmother spoke more of the old language than I do. Sarah played the recording a third time, and this time she focused not on the words but on Daniel Marsh's voice, the tonality, the emptiness in it. People in shock sounded confused, frightened, disconnected. This sounded like someone reading from a script they didn't understand, couldn't stop repeating. Like a record stuck in a groove. I want to go back to his campsite, she said. Full documentation. Something happened there, something specific. I need to see it. Morrison nodded slowly. Storm's supposed to break tomorrow morning. We've got a window before the next system moves in. Tom, you go with her. Full safety protocols. This weather's not forgiving mistakes. Copy that, Tom said, but he was still looking at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Later, she'd remember it as warning. They set out at first light, which in late February meant 7:43 a.m. The sky had cleared to that crystalline blue you only got in mountain winter, so saturated it almost hurt to look at. Temperature at Logan Pass read -8 Fahrenheit. Sarah and Tom loaded their packs with standard winter gear: avalanche beacons, probe poles, first aid, emergency bivvy, 30 feet of climbing rope, energy bars, thermoses of coffee. Sarah also brought her Nikon D90 with the macro lens, evidence bags, a handheld GPS unit, and her field notebook. The snowmobile ride to the Granite Park service road took 45 minutes. They had to break trail through sections where the storm had deposited 3-foot drifts. The park in winter was almost unrecognizable from its summer self. The Going to the Sun road became a corridor through blank whiteness, the surrounding peaks reduced to geometric shapes against the blue. No tourists, no traffic, just the two of them and 1,000 square miles of silence. Daniel Marsh's campsite was exactly as the initial response team had left it. Yellow evidence tape marked the perimeter, already half buried. The tent stood like a small orange monument, its fly crusted with ice. Sarah approached it methodically, photographing from multiple angles before she touched anything. Notice anything? She asked Tom. He'd been circling the perimeter, studying the snow. No animal tracks, none. You'd expect voles, snowshoe hares, maybe ermine. Nothing. Just boot prints from the response team and those weird impressions near the tent. Sarah moved closer to examine what he meant. Near the tent's entrance, pressed into the snow, were impressions that didn't match any boot or animal track she recognized. They were elongated, at least 18 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at one end. But the depth was wrong. Too shallow for something heavy enough to make prints that large. And there were only 3 of them, spaced irregularly, leading from the tent about 30 feet into the tree line, before they simply stopped. She photographed them from multiple angles, placed a ruler beside them for scale, then carefully made castings using the dental stone compound she'd brought. The silence while they worked felt textured, as if the air itself had weight. No wind, no bird calls, nothing. Sarah. Tom's voice was quiet. Come look at this. He was standing at the tree line, pointing at a lodgepole pine about 40 feet into the forest. Sarah trudged through the deep snow to join him, and her breath caught. The tree bark had been stripped in vertical gouges, starting about 7 feet up and extending another 3 feet higher. The exposed wood was fresh, pale and raw, but the gouges were too wide for bear claws, too deep, and bears would be hibernating now anyway. Each mark was roughly 3 inches wide and had carved through the bark into the sapwood beneath. What could do this? Tom asked. Sarah reached up to touch the lowest mark. Her gloved fingers traced the gouge. "I don't know. The height bothers me," Tom said. "Starting at 7 feet, that's too high for any animal on all fours." Sarah stepped back, looking up at the marks. Even a grizzly on hind legs wouldn't claw that high on a tree. They marked territory lower, where other bears can smell it. They documented the tree, took samples of the bark fragments scattered in the snow below it. Sarah's mind was working through possibilities, discarding them one by one. Vandalism, no footprints, lightning strike, wrong pattern, avalanche debris. Not at this elevation, and the marks were too deliberate. "Check the tent," she said. "I want to see inside." The tent was a North Face VE-25, 3-season but reinforced. Daniel Marsh had set it up properly. Good tension, stakes driven deep. Sarah unzipped the vestibule, then the main door. The smell hit her immediately. Not decay, something else. Something that made her throat close and her eyes water. Sweet and wrong, like overripe fruit mixed with copper. Inside, everything was orderly. Sleeping bag laid out, inflatable pad beneath it. A paperback novel face down on the sleeping bag. Sarah checked the title. The Terror, by Dan Simmons. She noted the irony grimly. Personal items organized in the corner. Headlamp, spare batteries, toiletries kit, phone charger with a dead phone still attached. The camp stove sat just inside the door, the pot of frozen oatmeal still on it. Sarah examined it closely. The oatmeal had been stirred, spoon still in the pot, half submerged. You could see where the spiral pattern had frozen mid-motion. "He was making breakfast," Tom said from behind her. "Middle of the night. Or he started making it at night." Sarah pointed at the headlamp. "But his headlamp's here. No light source. So he was cooking in the dark?" Sarah didn't answer. She was looking at the sleeping bag now, really looking. The fabric showed disturbance. Not the normal rumpling of someone sleeping, but something else. Impressions in the downfill that suggested weight, but distributed strangely. She took photographs, multiple angles, then gently lifted one edge. The inflatable sleeping pad beneath had a puncture. Small, precise, almost surgical. Air had escaped, leaving the pad completely flat. Sarah examined the puncture with her macro lens. The edges of the hole were too clean, too uniform. Not torn, cut, or punched through by something sharp and narrow. "Tom," she said carefully, "if you were going to stab through a sleeping pad, what would you use? Knife? Stick? Why would anyone—" "Look at the edges. This wasn't accidental. Someone or something punctured this deliberately." Tom crouched beside her, studying the hole. His face had gone very still. "The way it's positioned, whoever made this, they'd have been standing over him while he slept." Sarah felt it then. The wrongness that had been hovering at the edge of her perception since they'd arrived. This campsite looked safe, orderly, normal, but nothing that had happened here had been normal. Daniel Marsh hadn't panicked and run. He'd been doing something purposeful, making food in the dark perhaps, and then something had entered his tent, punctured his sleeping pad, and done something else. Something that made him strip off his boots and walk 8 miles barefoot through a blizzard while chanting in a language he didn't speak. "Bag everything," she said. "I want samples of the tent fabric near that hole. Anything that might have trace evidence. And I need to check the perimeter again." She climbed out of the tent and began a careful spiral search pattern, working outward from the campsite. The snow had accumulated in layers. You could read the storm's progression in the strata. She photographed each layer, noting the crystalline structure, looking for anything anomalous. 60 feet from the tent, she found it. A dark stain in the snow, roughly circular, about 8 inches in diameter. Partially covered by fresh snowfall but visible when she brushed the surface layer away. She called Tom over. "Blood?" he asked. Sarah pulled out a presumptive blood test kit. Hemastic strips, standard field equipment. She collected a sample of the stained snow, let it melt in a vial, then dipped the strip. It turned green immediately. Positive for blood. "Whose blood is the question?" she said. "Could be animal, could be Marsh's. Maybe he cut himself somehow before he left." But she didn't believe it. The stain was too far from the tent, positioned oddly, and there was no trail leading to or from it. Just this one spot, as if something had stood here and bled into the snow. Tom had his radio out. "I'm calling this in. Morrison needs to know we've got a potential crime scene here." "Wait." Sarah held up a hand. Something had caught her eye near the bloodstain. She knelt down, brushing snow carefully away with her gloved hand. Beneath the surface, frozen into the older snow layer, was an object. She worked it free carefully, a piece of antler, about 6 inches long, broken off at one end. The surface was carved with markings, not natural, deliberate. She held it up to the light. The carvings were symbols, repeated in a band around the antler's circumference. They looked old, the cuts weathered, darkened with age. Geometric patterns intersected with more organic shapes. She didn't recognize the symbolic system, but the craftsmanship was clear. This was ceremonial, purposeful. "Is this Blackfeet?" she asked Tom. He took the antler carefully, turning it in his hands. His expression darkened. "No. Well, maybe related? Some of these symbols look familiar from old stories, but not in this combination. This is..." He paused. "My grandmother told me about things like this once. Protection charms, wards, used in the old days when people were afraid of Wittikau. They'd carve them from shed antler, hang them outside their lodges in winter. Protection from Wendigo," Sarah said flatly. "Yeah." Tom looked at the campsite, then at the forest around them. "Question is, did Marsh bring this, or did someone leave it here? He's from Seattle, software engineer. Where would he get a Wendigo ward?" "Exactly." They worked in silence for another 30 minutes, collecting samples, documenting everything. Sarah's mind was working through the logic tree, trying to find a rational path through the evidence, but every branch led to impossibility. The timeline didn't work. The tracks didn't make sense. The antler shouldn't be here. And Daniel Marsh shouldn't have been found 8 miles away, chanting in Algonquian about something hunting him. The sun was starting its decline when they finished, the temperature dropping with it. Sarah's Garmin GPS read -12. They'd been at the site for nearly 4 hours. "We should head back," Tom said. "Storm system's coming in tonight." Sarah nodded, but she was looking at the tree line, at the deep shadows between the pines. The light was failing fast, the way it did in winter mountains. Not a gradual dimming, but a sudden draining, as if something were drinking the brightness from the air. "Tom," she said quietly, "you feel like we're being watched?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. "Yeah, since about 20 minutes after we got here." "Should have mentioned that earlier." "Should have. But you were in documentation mode. Didn't want to spook you." Sarah almost smiled. "Takes more than a feeling to spook me." "That's what worries me," Tom said, "because I'm spooked and I grew up with these stories." They packed up the evidence carefully, secured everything in their packs. Sarah took one last photograph of the campsite, wide angle, capturing the tent and the surrounding forest in the failing light. When she reviewed it later, she'd noticed something in the shadows between the trees, a vertical shape that shouldn't be there, too tall and too thin. But in the moment, in the cold and the dimming light and the absolute silence, she didn't see it. The ride back to Logan Pass felt longer than it should have. The shadows reached across the snow like fingers. Twice, Sarah thought she heard something moving parallel to them through the trees, something large matching their pace. But when she turned to look, there was nothing, just the forest and the growing dark. Tom heard it too. She could tell by the way he kept adjusting the snowmobile's mirror, glancing back at the trail behind them. Neither of them mentioned it. They reached Logan Pass as full darkness fell. The ranger station lights looked warm and impossibly distant across the white expanse of the parking lot. Sarah's hands were shaking as she dismounted, and not entirely from the cold. Inside, Morrison was waiting with news from the hospital. Daniel Marsh had stopped chanting. He'd gone completely silent instead. withdrawn into a catatonic state. Brain scans showed normal activity, no stroke, no tumor, no physiological explanation for his behavior. The psychiatric evaluation was pending. "What did you find?" Morrison asked. Sarah laid out the evidence bags on the table: bark samples, the carved antler, the blood-stained snow samples, photographs of the tracks. She walked him through everything, keeping her voice level and professional, but she could hear the strain in it, the edge of something that wanted to be fear but didn't have permission yet. Morrison examined the antler for a long time. "This could be a prop," he said finally. "Marsh could have brought it. Maybe he was interested in Native American artifacts, bought this online or something." "From a site that sells ceremonial Wendigo wards?" Tom asked. "Chief, those aren't exactly tourist items." "So what's your theory?" Morrison asked. "A Wendigo took a software engineer from Seattle?" "I'm not saying that," Tom said, but his voice was tight. "I'm saying something happened out there that we don't understand yet." Morrison turned to Sarah. "You're the scientist here. What's the rational explanation?" Sarah thought about the punctured sleeping pad, the vertical marks on the tree bark, the blood stain with no source, the way the forest had felt when they were leaving, like something vast and patient was watching them go. "I don't have one yet," she admitted. "But I want to check something. The hospital. Do they still have Marsh's clothing, the things he was wearing when they found him?" "Should be in evidence." "Why?" "Because he walked 8 miles barefoot through snow at 12 below zero. His feet were frostbitten, but he was still walking. That's not medically possible without serious nerve damage or some altered state. I want to see if there's anything else anomalous. Trace evidence, chemical exposure, anything." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'll call ahead. You can go tomorrow." "I'd like to go tonight." "Sarah, you've been out in the cold for 5 hours. You need rest." She wanted to argue, but her body was already agreeing with him. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "First thing tomorrow, then." "Agreed. Tom, write up your field report. Sarah, get some food in you, get warm. We'll reconvene at 0700. They dispersed. Sarah went to her quarters, a small efficiency apartment in the staff housing building. She made coffee, tried to eat a protein bar, couldn't. Her mind kept returning to the campsite, to the smell inside the tent, to the feeling of being watched. She pulled out her laptop and started researching. Wendigo brought up thousands of results. Wikipedia articles, folklore databases, horror fiction references, cryptozoology forums. She filtered for academic sources, anthropological studies. The academic literature was consistent. The Wendigo was a creature from Algonquian folklore, prevalent among Ojibwe, Cree, Innu, and related peoples across the northern forests. Descriptions varied, but common elements persisted. A gaunt giant, perpetually starving, associated with winter, cannibalism, and possession. People who resorted to eating human flesh in times of famine were said to transform into Wendigo, doomed to eternal hunger that could never be satisfied. Some anthropologists interpreted it as a cultural mechanism to prevent cannibalism. Others saw it as personification of harsh winter conditions and the psychological stress of isolation. A few suggested it might have roots in actual events, people driven mad by starvation, vitamin deficiencies causing aggression and paranoia. But then Sarah found something else. A paper from 1983, published in the Journal of Anthropological Research by a Dr. Margaret Coldwater. The title was Weetikau Psychosis, Re-examination of Culture-Bound Syndrome Classification. Dr. Coldwater had documented 23 cases between 1890 and 1920 of individuals in northern Alberta and Manitoba who'd exhibited what was termed Wendigo psychosis, a condition where people became convinced they were transforming into Wendigo. Symptoms included revulsion to normal food, craving for human flesh, attempts to self-harm, speaking in tongues, and in extreme cases, actual cannibalistic behavior. What caught Sarah's attention was the linguistic component. Coldwater had recorded the vocalizations of several subjects. She'd included phonetic transcriptions. Sarah compared them to the recording from Daniel Marsh. They matched. Not perfectly, but close enough. The same rhythmic cadence, the same core vocabulary. Words like Widikow, Kawishimu, phrases that translated roughly to "it is inside me" and "the hunger." But Daniel Marsh was from Seattle. He had no connection to Algonquian communities. He wouldn't know these phrases, yet he'd spoken them, perfectly pronounced, while in what appeared to be a fugue state. Sarah rubbed her eyes. It was past midnight. She should sleep. But something in Dr. Coldwater's paper had caught her attention. A footnote referencing another researcher, a doctor, Johann Krebs, who'd worked in the 1970s documenting what he called environmental transmission vectors for Wendigo psychosis. She searched for Krebs's work, found one paper published in an obscure journal in 1976, Geographical Clustering of Widikow Phenomena Towards an Ecological Model. The abstract suggested that Wendigo psychosis incidents showed spatial clustering around specific locations, particular valleys, certain hunting grounds, specific stands of forest. Krebs proposed that environmental factors might trigger the psychosis, perhaps fungal spores, or chemical compounds in certain plants, or even localized magnetic anomalies affecting brain function. The paper had been thoroughly criticized, and Krebs's career had apparently ended soon after. But the geographic data was interesting. Sarah pulled up a map, started plotting the historical incidents Krebs had documented. 3 of them were within 50 miles of Glacier National Park. She sat back staring at the map. This proved nothing. Correlation wasn't causation. Environmental triggers didn't explain the carved antler, the tracks, the marks on the tree. But it suggested something, a pattern maybe, a clustering of phenomena around certain places. Her phone rang, making her jump. Tom's number. "Yeah? You still up?" He sounded tense. "Working on research, what's wrong?" "I'm at the Apgar Ranger Station. Just got a call from a snowmobile club that runs the park boundary. They found something on the Camas Creek Trail, thought it was a dead elk at first, but..." He paused. "Sarah, I think you need to see this. Can it wait until morning?" "No," Tom said flatly. "It can't." The drive to Apgar took 30 minutes. Sarah brought her field kit, camera, and a bad feeling that was growing worse. Tom met her in the parking lot with a ranger named Kelly Chen, who looked shaken. "The snowmobile club leader is still out there," Kelly said. "Refused to leave until we arrived. Said something about, I don't know, sacred duty. He's Kootenai, takes the old ways seriously." They took snowmobiles, following Kelly's lead. The Camas Creek Trail ran along the park's western boundary, through dense forest at lower elevation. Even at night, with headlights cutting through the dark, Sarah could tell this was different terrain. Older trees, thicker underbrush buried under snow, a different quality to the silence. They found the snowmobile club leader, a man in his 60s named Martin, standing about 30 feet off the trail. He had a spotlight pointed at something on the ground. As they approached, Sarah saw why Kelly had looked shaken. It was an elk, or had been. A bull, probably 600 pounds when alive. Now it was scattered across the snow in a roughly circular pattern, as if something had torn it apart from the center outward. The skull sat in the middle of the circle, picked completely clean, antlers intact. Ribs radiated outward like spokes. Legs had been separated at the joints and placed at cardinal points: north, south, east, west. But the arrangement was too precise, too deliberate. This wasn't predation. This was something else. "No tracks except the elk's own," Martin said without greeting. His voice was rough, strained. "It walked here, stood in that spot, and something took it apart. Nothing else came or went. Just the elk walking in, and then..." He gestured at the carnage. Sarah approached slowly, photographing as she went. The snow around the elk was stained red, but there was less blood than there should be for this level of dismemberment. The bones showed no tooth marks, no scoring that would indicate scavenger activity. The joints had been separated cleanly, almost surgically. Tom was examining the skull. "Sarah, look at this." She joined him. The inside of the skull cavity was empty, brain matter removed completely. But carved into the interior surface of the skull, in the bone itself, were symbols. the same geometric pattern she'd seen on the antler from Daniel Marsh's campsite. "Tell me these were here before," Tom said quietly. Sarah couldn't answer. The carvings were too precise, too fresh. The bone showed no weathering, no age. These had been made recently, after the elk died. While it was being arranged, Martin spoke from behind them, his voice carrying the weight of old knowledge. "My grandfather told me about things like this. Offerings, messages. When the Wittikow walks, it leaves signs, warnings to turn back. Or sometimes," he paused, "sometimes it's attracting others of its kind, calling them to hunt." "Martin," Sarah said carefully, "has there been any unusual wildlife behavior in this area recently?" "Nothing's been normal this winter," Martin said. "Elk coming down to lower elevations weeks early. Wolf packs breaking up, going solitary. Found 3 dead ravens last month, all in a row on a log. No marks on them, just dead." He looked at her directly. "Whatever took this elk, it's the same thing that took that hiker, and it's still out here." They worked for another 2 hours, documenting everything. Sarah took samples of the bone carvings, the blood patterns, the surrounding snow. Tom photographed the arrangement from multiple angles. Kelly kept watch on the perimeter, radio in hand, scanning the tree line. Sarah found herself doing the same, looking into the darkness beyond the spotlights, searching for movement. The forest felt active in a way that had nothing to do with wind or animals. It felt watched, evaluated. When they finally packed up to leave, Martin pulled Sarah aside. "You're not going to find a rational explanation," he said. "I can see you trying. You're thinking environmental factors, maybe chemicals, some kind of mass psychosis, but that's not what this is." "What is it then?" Sarah asked. "A hunger that walks," Martin said simply. The old people had different names for it, but they all meant the same thing. Something that lives in the deep winter, in the spaces between human understanding. Something that takes. First it takes your warmth, then your will, then your shape, then everything you were. He looked at the dismembered elk. "That used to be a warning. Now I think it's just the beginning." Sarah wanted to dismiss it as folklore, as anthropological metaphor, but standing in the darkness, surrounded by impossibly precise carnage, with the memory of Daniel Marsh's chanting still echoing in her mind, dismissal felt like willful blindness. They rode back in silence. Sarah's mind was working through the evidence, trying to build a coherent picture. 2 incidents now, Daniel Marsh's campsite and the elk, both showing similar anomalies. Precise damage, symbolic markings, no explicable predator or human perpetrator, and both connected by the same folkloric thread, Wendigo. Back at headquarters, Morrison was still awake, looking at the photographs Tom had just uploaded. His face was gray. "I'm calling in the FBI," he said. "This is beyond Park Service jurisdiction. Mutilation of wildlife with ritualistic elements that triggers federal involvement." "Chief," Sarah said, "there's something else we need to consider. I've been researching historical incidents. There's a geographical pattern. Wendigo psychosis cases, unexplained deaths, livestock mutilations. They cluster around certain locations. 3 historical clusters within 50 miles of here." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not sure yet, but I think we need to look at this systematically. Map all the anomalous incidents in this region for the past century. Look for patterns. And," she hesitated, "I think we need to consult with tribal elders, people who know the traditional stories, not as folklore, but as historical record." Morrison looked at her for a long moment. "You're the scientist here, Sarah. You really think there's something to these stories?" Sarah thought about the punctured sleeping pad, the bloodstain with no source, the elk arranged like a ritual sacrifice, Daniel Marsh chanting in a language he'd never learned. "I think," she said carefully, "that we're dealing with something we don't understand. And when you don't understand something, you gather data from every available source, including oral tradition." Morrison nodded slowly. "All right, Tom, reach out to the Blackfeet Cultural Committee. See if anyone's willing to talk to us. Sarah, keep working the physical evidence. I want everything analyzed. Blood, bark, bone samples. Everything. And stay sharp. If this is some kind of cult activity, they might target researchers next. Cult activity. Sarah almost laughed at how much simpler that would be. Human perpetrators, understandable motivations, forensic evidence that made sense. But she'd seen the marks on that tree 7 feet high. She'd felt the weight of attention in the forest. This wasn't humans playing at ritual magic. This was something else entirely. Over the next 3 days, Sarah barely slept. She drove to Kalispell to examine Daniel Marsh's clothing, found trace elements on the fabric she couldn't identify, sent them to the lab in Missoula. She interviewed the snowplow operator who'd found Marsh, learned he'd been standing in the middle of the road facing north motionless, not wandering, standing, waiting. The FBI sent an agent, a woman named Carver, who specialized in ritualistic crimes. She spent 6 hours at the elk site, took her own samples, interviewed everyone. Then she left and Sarah never heard from her again. Morrison made inquiries, got vague responses about ongoing investigation and need-to-know basis. Tom's contacts with the Blackfeet Cultural Committee bore more fruit. An elder named Joseph Three Bears agreed to meet with them, off-reservation at a diner in Browning. He was 84, weathered as old wood, with eyes that took in everything and gave back nothing. "My grandfather hunted these mountains," Joseph said, stirring sugar into black coffee. "He told me there were places you didn't go in winter, valleys that stayed too quiet, stands of trees where the snow never laid right. He said the Wittikau kept those places, that it walked there when the cold was deepest." "Did he ever see one?" Sarah asked. "He saw what it left behind." Joseph's gaze fixed on her. "Man from the tribe back in 1932. Went out hunting, came back wrong. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't speak English, only the old tongue. Started carving things, symbols on bark, on bone, on his own skin. Said he was trying to keep it out, but it was already inside. They found him a week later, frozen solid in the Badger 2 medicine area, sitting upright in the snow, eyes open." Sarah felt cold that had nothing to do with the diner's drafty windows. What were the symbols supposed to do? Ward it away? Bind it? My grandfather said the old medicine men knew songs that could hold the Wittikau back. Keep it from taking someone completely. But you had to know the proper words, the proper offerings. And even then, he shook his head. The Wittikau is hunger given shape. You can't kill hunger. You can only try to contain it. Tom leaned forward. "Joseph, these symbols, would you recognize them if you saw them?" "I might." Sarah pulled out photographs of the carved antler and the elk skull, laid them on the table. Joseph studied them for a long time, his expression darkening. "These aren't wards," he said finally. "These are invitations." "Invitations to what?" Sarah asked. "To transformation, to joining. The Wittikau doesn't just hunt, it reproduces." He pointed at one symbol. "This here, that's asking for the hunger, opening yourself to it. And this one," he touched another symbol, "that's marking territory, claiming a place." He looked up at them. Whoever made these wasn't trying to protect themselves. They were trying to become Wittikau, or mark this land as belonging to one that already exists. The diner felt suddenly too warm, too crowded. Sarah's mind was racing through implications. If Joseph was right, if these symbols were intentional invitations rather than protective wards, then the paradigm shifted. This wasn't a victim being haunted. This was someone trying to summon something, or transform into it. Could Daniel Marsh have done this himself, she asked, before his episode? How much did he know about Algonquian traditions? Joseph asked. Nothing that we can determine. He's a software engineer from Seattle. No tribal connections. Joseph shook his head. Then no. These symbols, the knowledge required to make them correctly, that's not something you learn from books. That's passed down through proper channels. And even then, most of us don't learn the darker aspects. What you're showing me, this is old knowledge, forbidden knowledge. Tom asked the question Sarah was afraid to voice. So if Marsh didn't make these, who did? Maybe nobody human, Joseph said quietly. The Wittikow can use tools, can carve and mark. In the stories, it sometimes mimics human behavior, setting up camps, making fires, leaving trails, luring people in. The smart ones learn to avoid it. The unlucky ones, he gestured at Sarah's photographs. They end up like this, or worse. They talked for another hour. Joseph shared more details, specific locations his grandfather had mentioned as dangerous, behavioral patterns attributed to Wendigo, methods the old medicine men had used for protection. Sarah took notes, cross-referencing with the historical data she'd compiled. A pattern was emerging. The geographical clusters she'd identified earlier aligned with the places Joseph's grandfather had warned about. The Badger 2 Medicine area, certain drainages off the North Fork, the upper reaches of Camas Creek. All of them showed repeated incidents across decades, disappearances, unexplained deaths, reports of people acting strangely before vanishing. Joseph, Sarah said carefully, is there any record of these things being stopped? Killed? You can't kill hunger, Joseph repeated. But the old people knew rituals, ways to bind it to specific places, keep it contained. My grandfather said there were songs that would trap the Wittikow, make it sleep through the summer. But you needed several medicine men working together, and you needed to know its true name. Its true name? Every Wittikow has a name. The name of the person it used to be before the hunger took them. If you know that name and you speak it properly, you can command it, bind it. My grandfather said the really old Wittikow, the ones that have been around for centuries, their names are lost. Those ones can't be bound anymore. They're pure hunger, no human left. Sarah felt something click in her mind. Daniel Marsh. He was chanting something. A name, maybe. She pulled out her phone, played the recording. Joseph listened intently, his expression growing troubled. That's not a name, he said. That's a claim. He's saying, it hunts me, it finds me, I am consumed. But the pronunciation, he's speaking it like someone born to the language. That shouldn't be possible. Unless he's been possessed, Tom said. Or transformed, Joseph added. The stories say when the Wittikow takes someone, they speak in the old tongue. It's the hunger speaking through them, making its claim official. They left the diner with more questions than answers. Sarah drove back to Glacier in silence, mind churning. The evidence was pointing toward something impossible, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Geographical clustering, ritual markings, linguistic anomalies, behavioral transformation, all of it connected by a folkloric thread that spanned centuries. That night, Sarah laid out everything on her apartment floor: photographs, maps, lab reports, historical documents, interview transcripts. She was looking for the missing piece, the element that would make sense of the pattern. The lab results had come back on the trace elements from Daniel Marsh's clothing. Unknown organic compounds, no match in any database. Chemical signature suggesting extreme cold exposure, but also something else. Proteins that shouldn't exist in mammalian tissue. The blood from the campsite was elk blood, but with anomalous markers. The bark samples showed cellular degradation consistent with rapid desiccation, as if something had drained the moisture from the living tissue. Sarah cross-referenced the historical incidents with weather data. Found another pattern. All of them occurred during extreme cold snaps, when temperatures dropped below zero for extended periods, as if the cold itself was a catalyst, or a door that opened under the right conditions. Her phone rang at 2 a.m. Morrison. "We've got another one," he said without preamble. "Cross-country skier. Reported missing this evening. Vehicle found at the Lake McDonald trailhead. Park police just found him at the Sperry Chalet service road. Same condition as Marsh. Barefoot, hypothermic, unresponsive. They're transporting to Kalispell now." Sarah was already pulling on her gear. "I'm coming." "Negative. Storms moved in, roads are whiteout conditions. You stay put. Tom and I will meet the ambulance at the hospital, but Sarah..." He paused. "The skier, He was found carving something, had a piece of slate rock, was using a sharp stone to make marks. Deep cuts in his hands from the work, didn't even notice he was bleeding. The EMTs had to pry it away from him. What kind of marks? Same symbols we've been seeing. Exactly the same. After Morrison hung up, Sarah stared at the map on her floor. 2 victims now, both found in altered states, both connected to the same symbolic system, both having been in the wilderness during extreme cold. The pattern was accelerating. She marked the locations where Marsh and the new victim had been found, drew lines connecting them to the historical incident sites. The lines formed a rough triangle, with the center point falling somewhere in the northern section of the park, an area called the Boulder Pass region, rarely visited even in summer, completely inaccessible in winter. Sarah pulled up topographical maps of Boulder Pass. Remote didn't begin to describe it. Over 15 miles from the nearest road, surrounded by peaks over 8,000 feet, accessible only by grueling trail hiking, the kind of place you could disappear completely, and no one would find you until the snow melted. If they found you at all. According to the historical records, Boulder Pass had 3 documented disappearances between 1940 and 1960. 2 hunters and a ranger. None of the bodies had been recovered. The area had acquired a reputation. Local guides called it the hungry place. Indigenous people avoided it entirely. Sarah made a decision that she knew was probably stupid, possibly suicidal, but felt inevitable. She was going to Boulder Pass. She needed to see what was there. Needed to understand the source. Morning came gray and bitter. The storm had passed, leaving 18 inches of fresh snow and temperatures at -15. Sarah packed carefully, winter camping gear, emergency supplies, flares, satellite phone, her Nikon, evidence collection kit. She left a note in her apartment, sealed envelope, instructions to open it if she didn't return in 3 days. Then she drove to the ranger station, checked out an avalanche beacon, told the duty ranger she was doing a routine equipment inspection at Lake McDonald, stretched the truth to the breaking point. Then she drove to the pole bridge area on the park's western edge, the closest access point to Boulder Pass. The trail was buried under winter's accumulation, but Sarah had her compass, GPS, and years of backcountry experience. She set out on snowshoes at 9 a.m., heading northeast into the wilderness. The forest closed around her like a fist. Douglas fir and lodgepole pine, branches heavy with snow, creating a tunnel effect that blocked most of the gray sky. Her breath came in white plumes. The only sounds were her snowshoes crunching through the powder and the occasional crack of a tree branch breaking under ice weight. By noon, she'd covered 6 miles and gained 2,000 feet of elevation. The temperature was dropping, -20, maybe colder in the shade. Sarah stopped to eat, forcing down a protein bar that tasted like cardboard, drinking water from her insulated bottle. The silence was absolute. No birds, no wind, nothing. She checked her GPS. Still 4 miles from Boulder Pass proper, another 2,000 feet of elevation to gain. The sun, already weak through the cloud cover, was beginning its decline. She'd need to set up camp before full dark. But something was wrong. Sarah couldn't articulate it, but her instincts, honed by years in the wilderness, were screaming at her. The forest felt wrong. Not hostile exactly, just wrong. Like she was walking through a place that resented her presence, or was waiting for something. She pressed on, climbing through deepening snow. The trail markers were long buried, but the geography matched her maps. As elevation increased, the trees changed. Subalpine fir now, stunted and twisted by wind, separated by open snowfields that left her exposed. That's when she found the first marker. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking. A small cairn of stones, maybe 3 feet high, sitting at the edge of the tree line. Not unusual in itself. Hikers often built cairns to mark routes, but this one was wrong. The stones were arranged too precisely, and carved into the topmost stone was a symbol. One of the symbols from the antler, from the elk skull. Sarah photographed it, took GPS coordinates, then moved on. Her unease was growing. 200 yards later, she found another cairn. Different configuration, same symbols. Then another. They were spaced at regular intervals, forming a line that led up valley toward Boulder Pass. Someone had marked a trail, or created a boundary. Sarah stopped, breathing hard from the exertion and the altitude. The smart thing would be to turn back. Radio for backup. Come back with a team. But she knew Morrison would never authorize it. There was no justification for a full search and rescue operation based on hunches and folklore. And besides, something was pulling her forward. Not physical force, more like inevitability. The sense that she'd started something that needed finishing. She kept climbing. By 3 p.m., she reached what her GPS indicated was Boulder Pass, a high saddle between two peaks, wind-scoured and desolate. The snow here was wind-packed, crusty, easier to walk on, but the exposure was severe. Wind whipped across the pass with physical force, driving ice crystals that stung exposed skin. Sarah pulled her balaclava up, adjusted her goggles, scanned the terrain. The pass stretched about a half-mile across, maybe 200 yards wide, with steep cliffs rising on both sides. At the far end, visible through the blowing snow, was a dark shape, structure of some kind. She approached cautiously. As she got closer, details resolved. It was a cabin, ancient, half-collapsed, built of logs that had weathered to gray stone. No windows remained, just black openings like eye sockets. The door hung askew on broken hinges. Sarah checked her GPS history against historical records. This location matched the old Boulder Pass patrol cabin, built in the 1930s, abandoned in the 1960s after the disappearances. It shouldn't still be standing. Winters this harsh would have reduced it to rubble decades ago. But here it was, defiant and wrong. She approached the door, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she'd come this far. She needed to see. Inside was darkness. Sarah clicked on her headlamp and the beam cut through shadows thick as syrup. The cabin was a single room, maybe 15 feet square. Dirt floor, collapsed bunk against one wall, table made of split logs, still upright somehow, and bones. They covered the floor in arrangements that made Sarah's skin crawl. Animal bones mostly, elk, deer, smaller mammals, but positioned deliberately. Circles within circles, radiating patterns. At the center of it all was a human skull, picked clean, eye sockets facing the door. Sarah's breath was coming too fast now, the sound loud in the silence. She forced herself to move carefully, photographing everything, documenting the arrangement. The bones were old, decades old based on the weathering. But there were fresh marks too, recent carvings on several of the larger bones, the same symbols over and over. Against the back wall was something else. Scratches in the wood, deep, deliberate. Sarah moved closer, angling her light. The scratches formed letters, English, a message carved and recarved, as if the writer had repeated it obsessively. It walks, it hungers, it changes us. It makes us home, it walks, it hungers, it changes us, it makes us home, it walks, it hungers. The words repeated hundreds of times, covering the entire wall. The carving was old at the top, fresher toward the bottom, as if someone had been trapped here, carving the same message over and over, year after year. Sarah backed toward the door, her hands trembling. This had been a mistake, a terrible mistake. She needed to leave. Needed to... The headlamp flickered. Sarah froze. She checked the batteries that morning. Fresh ones. They shouldn't... The light died completely. Darkness swallowed her, absolute and suffocating. Sarah fumbled for her backup flashlight, fingers numb with cold and fear. Found it, clicked it on. Nothing. Dead. Impossible. She stood in perfect darkness, listening to her own panicked breathing and the wind moaning through the cabin's gaps. Something else was there. She couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, but she knew with animal certainty that she wasn't alone. A sound broke the darkness. Soft at first, then growing. Breathing. Ragged and wet, coming from the corner near the collapsed bunk. But wrong. Too slow. Too deep. Like an enormous bellows working. Sarah's hand found the door frame. She backed through it, stumbling into the gray light of the dying afternoon. The breathing didn't follow, but she could still hear it, emanating from the cabin's darkness like a wound in the world. She ran. Not a measured retreat. Full panic flight, plunging through the snow, not caring about the trail, just needing distance between herself and that place. She made it maybe 200 yards before her rational mind reasserted control enough to make her stop. She was breathing too hard, burning too much energy. At this altitude, in this cold, panic was lethal. Sarah forced herself to slow down, to breathe evenly, to think. She pulled out her GPS, still working. The cabin's location was marked. She was heading the right direction, back toward the trail. She could make it out before full dark if she pushed hard and didn't panic again. She started moving, maintaining a steady pace. Behind her, the cabin receded into the gray distance, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following. Not close, not visible, just there, in the periphery, matching her pace. The sun was setting when she reached the tree line. Full dark would follow within 30 minutes. Sarah needed shelter, needed to make camp, but not here, not this close to Boulder Pass. She kept moving, descending as fast as the terrain allowed. 2 miles down, she found a spot that felt marginally safer. A small clearing with good sight lines protected from wind. She set up her tent with shaking hands, got her stove going, forced herself to drink hot coffee and eat. The temperature was dropping fast, -25 by her estimate. Her sleeping bag was rated to -40, but she layered on all her clothing anyway. Inside the tent, with the stove providing minimal warmth, Sarah tried to process what she'd found. The cabin, the bones, the message carved obsessively into the wall, the breathing in the darkness. Her rational mind offered explanations. Old cabin, animal den, maybe bears hibernating, wind through gaps creating acoustic effects, equipment failure due to cold. All of it possible, all of it reasonable. But she'd felt it. The presence, the attention, something vast and patient and desperately hungry. Sarah's satellite phone had signal, barely. She should call Morrison, report her location, what she'd found. But how would she explain it? "Chief, I violated protocols to investigate a folklore site and found a creepy cabin with bones and scary breathing." She'd be written up, maybe dismissed, and they still wouldn't understand what was happening. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and started writing. Everything she'd observed, every detail. If something happened to her, at least there'd be a record. The wind picked up around midnight, shaking the tent. Sarah lay in her sleeping bag, too wired to sleep, listening to the storm build. The fabric snapped and rippled. Tree branches cracked. And underneath it all, she heard something else. Movement. Circling the tent. Too large to be an animal. Too deliberate. She unzipped her sleeping bag quietly, grabbed her knife. Not that it would do any good, but holding it made her feel fractionally less helpless. She waited, listening. The movement stopped directly outside the tent door. Sarah could see the shadow through the fabric, something tall, impossibly tall, blocking the ambient light. Humanoid in shape, but wrong. Too thin, proportions distorted. Then it spoke. Not in English, not in any language Sarah recognized, but the phonemes were familiar. The same sounds Daniel Marsh had been chanting. Widikow, Kawishimiu. The hunger finds you. Sarah's hand tightened on the knife. The shadow outside didn't move, just stood there, and Sarah had the horrifying realization that it was waiting. Not attacking, waiting for her to come out, or for something else. Minutes passed. 5. 10. The shadow remained. Sarah's mind was fragmenting between terror and the bizarre impulse to unzip the tent, to see what it was, to finally understand. Then the shadow moved. Not away. Closer. She watched it lean down, bending at angles that shouldn't be possible, until something pressed against the tent fabric directly in front of her face. She could see the outline clearly now. A hand, but too long. Fingers extended like claws. It pressed against the nylon, directly where her head would be if she weren't frozen in place 18 inches back. The clawed hand drew downward, slowly, deliberately. Where it touched, the tent fabric crystallized, ice forming instantly, spreading in fractal patterns. The temperature inside the tent plummeted. Sarah's breath came out in white clouds so thick they obscured her vision. She was going to die. She understood that now. Whatever was outside wouldn't leave. It would wait through the night, and eventually she'd freeze or suffocate or lose her mind, and then it would take her, transform her, make her like Daniel Marsh, like the others. But Sarah Brennan hadn't survived 14 years in the wilderness by giving up. Her analytical mind, even in the grip of terror, was still working. She thought about Joseph Threebear's words, the proper names, the binding songs, knowledge she didn't have, but the carved antler. She still had it in her pack. Evidence bag containing the antler from Daniel Marsh's campsite, carved with protection symbols. Sarah lunged for her pack, fingers numb with cold, digging through compartments. Found the evidence bag, ripped it open. The antler fell into her hand, and she felt something shift. Not physical, but atmospheric. The pressure lessened fractionally. The shadow outside the tent straightened, pulling back. Sarah gripped the antler, holding it in front of her like a talisman. The symbols carved into it seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision, though that was impossible. Antler doesn't glow, but something was happening. The shadow circled the tent again, slower now, deliberate. Sarah turned to track it, keeping the antler pointed toward the darkness. The crystallized tent fabric wasn't spreading anymore. The temperature, while still well below zero, wasn't dropping further. Then the voice came again, but different this time. Words she could understand, though the voice itself was wrong, layered, harmonized with itself as if multiple throats were speaking in unison. You carry dead protection, old magic, weak now, but enough to make you interesting. Sarah's throat was too dry to speak. She managed to whisper. What are you? Hunger given shape, winter made manifest, the transformation that waits in the deep cold. A pause. You know what I am. You came here to understand. Now you begin to. The others. Daniel Marsh, the skier. You took them. Took? The voice almost sounded amused. No. They invited. They carved the symbols. Opened themselves. You found the marks, yes? Invitations. Requests. Humanity is so desperate to become something else. Something more. I only provide. But they didn't know what they were doing. Marsh had no connection to... The knowledge lives in the land, in the cold places, the hungry places. Humans come here seeking transformation, even if they don't know it consciously. The altitude, the isolation, the cold, it breaks down walls, makes them receptive, and when they're ready, I teach them the old ways. Give them the symbols. Let them choose. Sarah's mind was reeling. Choose what? Transformation, transcendence, to become hunger instead of being consumed by it, to walk the winter as I do, eternal and vast. No more fear, no more weakness, just the pure clarity of endless appetite. That's not transcendence, that's annihilation. The shadow moved closer again. You understand nothing. You with your science and your explanations. You reduce mystery to mechanism, but some things cannot be reduced. I am the cold that walks, the famine spirit, the endless maw. I have been here since the first winter. I will be here when the last human freezes, and I offer a gift, to join me, to become hunger instead of victim. The tent wall flexed inward, bulging impossibly. Sarah gripped the antler tighter. I refuse. You will not. Eventually they all choose. The cold breaks them down. Fear erodes resistance. And when you're desperate enough, alone enough, frozen enough, you'll carve the symbols too. You'll invite me in, and I will make you vast. I'm not alone, Sarah said, trying to inject confidence she didn't feel. There are people who know I'm here. They'll come looking. Let them come. More opportunities, more invitations. The winter is long. I am patient. Then the presence withdrew. Sarah felt it like a physical release, pressure lifting from her chest. The shadow outside moved away, becoming indistinct, then fading entirely into the darkness. But the voice echoed one last time, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. You carry dead magic, small scholar. It will fade. And when it does, we will continue this conversation. I look forward to teaching you the symbols, to hearing you speak the invitation, to welcoming you home. Then silence. Just wind and darkness and Sarah's ragged breathing. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. She sat with her back against the tent wall, antler clutched in her hands, waiting for dawn. The night stretched endlessly, each minute a small eternity. She thought about Daniel Marsh, about the skier, about the message carved in the cabin wall. It changes us. It makes us home. Around 4 a.m., Sarah made a decision. If she stayed here, it would come back. If she tried to wait for rescue, she'd die. Her only chance was to move now in the darkness, to get as far from this place as possible before the dead magic of the antler faded completely. She packed by feel, hands shaking, left the tent standing. No time to break it down. She'd report it lost, take the disciplinary action. Survival trumped protocol. The descent in darkness was nightmare fuel, stumbling through snow she couldn't see, navigating by compass and GPS screen glow, every shadow a potential threat. But fear proved motivating. She made progress that should have been impossible. Dawn came gray and reluctant. Sarah was 6 miles from Boulder Pass, still alive, legs burning from sustained exertion. She stopped only long enough to drink water, eat a handful of trail mix, check her GPS. Another 10 miles to the trailhead. Possible, if she pushed, if nothing stopped her. She kept moving. The forest in daylight looked normal, just trees and snow and weak sunlight filtering through branches. But Sarah knew better now. Knew that normalcy was surface tension thin, that underneath lurked something vast and patient and infinitely hungry. By noon, she reached her truck. The heater felt like heaven. She sat for 5 minutes, letting warmth seep into frozen muscles, trying to decide what to do next. Report what she'd found? To who? Morrison would think she'd cracked, suffered altitude sickness or hypothermia-induced delusion. The FBI wouldn't care. Carver had already written off the incidents as unsolvable cult activity, but she couldn't do nothing. Whatever was at Boulder Pass, entity, phenomenon, folkloric manifestation made real, it was transforming people, creating more of itself. And if Joseph Three Bears was right, if these things reproduced, then Daniel Marsh and the skier were just the beginning. Sarah drove to the hospital in Kalispell. Daniel Marsh was still there, still catatonic. The skier, identified as Robert Chen, age 34, physical therapist from Missoula, was in the next room over, same condition. Sarah talked her way past hospital security with her ranger credentials, claimed she needed to check on victims of park incidents. Daniel Marsh sat upright in bed, eyes open but vacant. IV in his arm, monitoring equipment beeping. Sarah stood in the doorway studying him. He looked thinner than in the photos from before his incident. Not physically thinner. His body mass appeared unchanged. But something about him suggested absence, as if parts of him had been carved away. She pulled out the antler, held it up where Marsh could see it. His eyes didn't track, didn't respond. "Daniel," she said quietly, "can you hear me? I found where you were, found what marked you. I need to know. Did you carve those symbols yourself? Or did something teach you?" No response. Just that empty stare. Sarah tried another approach. "Witikow," she said, pronouncing it the way she'd heard it from the shadow. "Kawishimiu." Marsh's eyes moved. Not much, just a fractional shift, but definitely movement. Tracking toward her, or toward the antler. "What did it promise you?" Sarah asked. "What did you think you were inviting?" Marsh's mouth opened, closed, opened again. A whisper emerged, barely audible. Silence. Sarah moved closer. Silence. Inside, the noise, constant, Thoughts, worries, fears, never quiet, never still. His voice was rusty, broken. In the cold, in the deep snow, I heard it, offering. Perfect silence. No more anxiety, no more racing mind. Just vast calm. But that's not what you got. Marsh's eyes found hers finally, and what Sarah saw there made her stomach clench. Not emptiness, not possession, understanding. Terrible, complete understanding. It is, Marsh said. The silence is perfect. But to hear it, you have to become it, have to dissolve into the hunger. No more self to be anxious, no more mind to race, just appetite, endless and pure. A tear tracked down his cheek. I'm still dissolving, can feel it. Every day, less of me, more of it. Soon I'll be silent completely and I'll be so grateful. Daniel, you can fight this, whatever it did to you. You don't understand, he interrupted. I'm not fighting. I'm welcoming. The transformation is mercy. You'll see. When it touches you, when it offers, you'll understand why we say yes. Sarah backed toward the door. I won't. I'm not like you. Marsh smiled, and it was the saddest thing Sarah had ever seen. Everyone thinks that, until the cold gets deep enough, until they're alone enough. Then they all carve the symbols, they all speak the invitation, they all go home. She left before he could say more. Robert Chen's room was 3 doors down. Same setup, catatonic patient, monitoring equipment, medical staff at a loss. But Chen wasn't staring vacant like Marsh. He was watching the window, focused intently on something only he could see. Sarah approached cautiously. Robert? He didn't turn. It's outside, always outside. Waiting. So patient. What's waiting? The next winter. The cold that walks. It told me, I'm not ready yet. Not fully transformed. Need more time. But it's waiting. When I'm ready, it'll come back. Finish the teaching. Make me vast. Robert, look at me. He did, and his eyes were clearer than Marsh's. More present. But the understanding was there too. The terrible acceptance. It's not evil, Chen said. That's what you need to understand. It's not malicious. It's just what it is. Hunger doesn't hate. It just consumes. And when you join it, you stop being consumed. You become the process instead of the victim. That's what it told you? That's what I know. Felt it when it touched me. The symbols, they're not just marks. They're knowledge, compressed wisdom. Thousands of years of understanding carved into bone and bark and skin. When you make them, you're downloading that wisdom, opening yourself to it. And once you understand, you can't go back. You can only move forward. Complete the transformation. Sarah felt cold that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Both men were saying the same thing, not acting possessed or controlled, acting like converts, like they'd been shown something transcendent and couldn't unsee it. There's no cure, is there? Sarah asked. No way to reverse this. Chen smiled. Why would you want to? Why stay small and frightened and isolated when you could be vast and eternal and part of something immense? The Wendigo isn't a monster, Ranger. It's evolution, the next step. And winter by winter, it's teaching more of us, inviting us to join. Sarah left the hospital feeling nauseous. She sat in her truck, staring at nothing, trying to process. The entity at Boulder Pass wasn't just hunting. It was evangelizing, converting, creating a congregation of hunger. Her phone rang. Morrison. Where have you been? He demanded. You missed 2 check-ins. Equipment inspection ran long. Sarah lied automatically. What's wrong? We've got 3 more. 3 hikers reported missing in the past 8 hours. Different areas of the park, but same conditions, winter camping, solo trips, experienced outdoors people. And Sarah? He paused. One of them is Kelly Chen. Called in sick yesterday. Said she was taking a personal day. Her boyfriend just reported her truck at the Bowman Lake trailhead. Kelly Chen. the ranger who'd responded to the elk mutilation with them. Young, capable, rational. Sarah felt ice crystallize in her stomach. She was there, Sarah said. At the elk site. She saw the symbols. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we need to quarantine anyone who's been in contact with these incidents. Anyone who's seen the symbols, heard the recordings, touched the evidence. Morrison, this thing, whatever it is, it spreads. Not like a disease, like an idea. Once you're exposed to it, once you understand what it's offering, some people, they seek it out. Silence on the line. Then, Sarah, do you hear yourself? You're talking about a mimetic hazard. That's sci-fi nonsense. Is it? Joseph Three Bears said the knowledge lives in the land, that people come to the cold places seeking transformation, even if they don't know it consciously. What if exposure to this thing's markers, the symbols, the recordings, the sites? What if that's enough to plant the suggestion? To make vulnerable people start thinking about it, obsessing about it, until they go looking for their own invitation? That's... Morrison stopped. Christ, that actually makes a horrible kind of sense. Kelly's been stressed, overworked, recent breakup. If something made her think the mountains offered, what did you call it? Transcendence? We need to find her, before she finds it. Already mobilizing SAR teams, but Sarah, with 3 missing in different areas, we're spread thin. I need you to... I know where she's going, Sarah interrupted. Boulder Pass. That's where it lives, where it transforms them. I need to get there first. Another pause. Sarah, you sound sure about this. Too sure. Have you been? Yes, Sarah admitted. I went there, yesterday. I found the old patrol cabin, found what's inside, and I encountered... She struggled for words. The source. The thing all this traces back to. Morrison, it's real. The Wendigo, the winter spirit, whatever you want to call it. It's real, and it's actively recruiting. Jesus Christ, Sarah. You went alone. Violated protocols, put yourself at risk. And I found answers. The only answers we're going to get. Now we need to stop it before it takes Kelly. How? How do we stop a folklore monster? Sarah thought about Joseph Three Bears' words. The binding songs. The true names, knowledge she didn't have, but maybe someone did. I need to talk to Joseph again, need to learn the binding ritual, and I need a team. People who haven't been exposed to the symbols, who won't be tempted by what it offers. Can you organize that? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could practically hear him weighing options, calculating risks, trying to decide if she'd lost her mind. All right, he said finally. You've got 24 hours. Find your ritual. Find your team. But Sarah, if this goes sideways, if you can't find a rational solution to what's happening, we're calling in the military. Quarantining the entire northern section. Nobody in or out until we understand what we're dealing with. Agreed. I'll check in every 4 hours. She drove to Browning, broke speed limits the entire way. Found Joseph Three Bears at his daughter's house, sitting on the porch despite the cold, looking like he'd been waiting for her. You went there, he said. Not a question. Yeah. And it spoke to you. Yeah. Joseph nodded slowly. My grandfather said the Widow talks to those it wants to keep. The ones strong enough to be worthy vessels. You should be honored. I don't feel honored. I feel terrified. Joseph, I need to know how to stop it, how to bind it. You said your grandfather knew songs. Those songs died with him, the last medicine man who knew the complete ritual passed in 1979. Some of us remember fragments, but fragments aren't enough. The binding requires precise words, perfect pronunciation, specific offerings made in the right order. One mistake and you just make it angry. Sarah felt desperation rising. So we're just supposed to let it keep taking people, watch them transform into... She gestured helplessly. There is one other option. Joseph's expression was grave. The old people believed you could starve a widow, Not literally. You can't deny hunger its nature. But you can isolate it. Keep people away from its territory. If it has no one to transform, no new vessels, eventually it goes dormant, sleeps, maybe for decades, maybe forever. Quarantine, Sarah said. Close off the northern section of the park. For how long? Years? Generations? And what happens to the people it's already touched? The ones transforming? They'll keep seeking it out, keep trying to complete the process. You'd have to contain them too. Prison? Psychiatric hold? For how long? Sarah had no answer. Both options were impossible. Let it continue spreading or imprison victims in close, vast swathes of wilderness indefinitely. There had to be another way. What if we destroyed it? She asked. Fire, explosives, something? Joseph shook his head. The Wittikow isn't physical in the way you're thinking. It's more like concentrated belief. Fear and hunger given form by centuries of human terror. You can't blow up an idea, can't burn down fear. But it has a physical presence. I saw it. It left marks, it spoke. What you saw was a manifestation like ice forming on a window. You can scrape away the ice, but the cold that made it is still there. The Wittikow exists in the space between physical and spiritual, between real and believed. That's what makes it so powerful, and so impossible to kill. Sarah sat down heavily on the porch steps. So what do we do? Just give up? No. Joseph's voice was firm. We do what the old people did. We witness, we remember, we warn. And when someone falls to it, we mourn them, but we don't follow. That's how humans survived the Wittikow for thousands of years, by accepting we couldn't destroy it, only coexist with it carefully. That's not good enough, not in the modern world. We can't just cordon off half a national park and tell people, sorry, there's a cannibalistic winter spirit here, stay away. They won't believe it. They'll keep coming, and it'll keep converting them. Then you have a choice, Joseph said quietly. Change what people believe or change how they interact with belief. Make the Wittikow into a joke, a tourist curiosity, something so commercialized and defanged that it loses its power, or... He paused. Accept that some places should stay wild, should stay dangerous, should keep their mysteries and their monsters. Sarah thought about Daniel Marsh and Robert Chen in their hospital beds, dissolving slowly into hunger. Thought about Kelly Chen somewhere in the wilderness, carving symbols into her own flesh, inviting transformation. Thought about the cabin at Boulder Pass, bones arranged in patterns that encoded vast and terrible knowledge. I'm going back, she said, to Boulder Pass. I'm going to find Kelly before she completes the ritual, and I'm going to face that thing again. Maybe I can't kill it, but I can refuse it. I can choose to stay human. Joseph looked at her for a long time. You understand that by going back, by confronting it again, you're putting yourself in danger. The more you interact with it, the more it gets into your head. The symbols, the words, the understanding, they accumulate. Eventually, they reach critical mass, and then you start carving. I know. You'd be a good vessel. Smart, strong, experienced. It probably wants you badly. I know that too. Joseph reached into his pocket, pulled out something wrapped in leather. Then take this. It was my grandfather's. A true protection charm, made by someone who knew the proper rituals. It's not dead magic like the antler you found. It's still active, still potent. It won't stop the Wittikow, but it might buy you time. Keep you yourself a little longer. He unwrapped the leather to reveal a small bundle. Carved bone, dried herbs, something that might have been a bird's skull. Sarah took it carefully. It felt warm, which shouldn't be possible in this cold. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if you come back still human. Sarah drove back to Glacier as sunset stained the sky red. She had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, not enough to reach Boulder Pass. She'd have to camp again, face another night in the wilderness, risk another encounter. But this time she had Joseph's charm. This time she was prepared. Morrison had assembled a team, 4 rangers, all experienced winter ops. none of whom had been exposed to the symbols. Sarah briefed them at the station, laying out what they'd face. She expected skepticism, mockery, instead got grim acceptance. They'd all heard the stories, they'd all seen the evidence, and they all understood that sometimes reality was stranger and darker than training prepared you for. They set out at first light, 6 of them on snowmobiles loaded with gear. Sarah carried Joseph's charm in her pocket, the carved antler in her pack. Insurance and hedge, inadequate against what they were facing, but better than nothing. The journey to Boulder Pass took 6 hours, longer than Sarah's solo trip because they had to maintain team cohesion, couldn't push as hard. But the extra people made it feel safer. Voices on the radio, other heartbeats nearby, human presence pushing back against the vast silence. They found Kelly Chen's tracks 3 miles from the pass, snowshoe prints heading directly toward the same approach Sarah had taken. She'd been moving fast, bypassing her usual careful navigation, moving like someone who knew exactly where she was going. "She's close," Sarah said into her radio. "Maybe an hour ahead. We need to catch her before she reaches the cabin." They pushed harder, following Kelly's trail through the thinning trees. The landscape grew more desolate as they climbed. Less snow, more exposed rock, wind that cut through layers like they weren't there. The team was feeling it, Sarah could tell, the oppressive wrongness of the place, the sense of trespass. They found Kelly at the tree line just below the pass. She was kneeling in the snow, carving something with a broken piece of slate. Her hands were bleeding, fingers nearly frozen, but she worked with intense focus. Around her, arranged in a circle, were the bones of small animals, squirrels, birds, a pine marten, fresh kills, steam still rising from their blood. "Kelly," Sarah called out, "stop, please." Kelly looked up and her eyes were distant, not possessed, not crazed, just certain, deeply, terribly certain. "Sarah, you came. It said you would. Said you'd try to stop me." She smiled. "But you can't. I'm so close. Can feel it. The last symbol, and then I'll understand. Then I'll be free." Free from what? From fear. From inadequacy. From always feeling like I'm not enough. Kelly's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like? To constantly doubt yourself? To feel like everyone's judging you, finding you lacking? Out here in the cold, with it, none of that matters. Just the clarity of hunger, the simplicity of appetite. I won't have to be Kelly anymore. I'll be vast." Sarah approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. The other rangers hung back, uncertain. This wasn't a rescue scenario they'd trained for. "Kelly, what you're feeling, that's what it wants you to feel. That self-doubt, that inadequacy, it preys on that, uses it, but becoming hunger won't solve those feelings. It'll just erase you completely." "Good," Kelly said simply. "I want to be erased. I want to dissolve into something bigger, and you can't stop me. Look." She held up her hands, showing the symbols carved into her palms. "I'm already transforming. Can feel it. The cold doesn't hurt anymore. The hunger feels right, natural. Soon I'll complete the ritual and it'll finish what it started." Sarah felt Joseph's charm in her pocket, warm against her leg. An idea formed, desperate, probably stupid, but the only option she had. "What if I could show you another way?" Sarah asked. "Not to erase yourself, but to strengthen yourself? To face the doubt and inadequacy without needing to become something else?" Kelly laughed, bitter and broken. "There is no other way. I've tried therapy, medication, mindfulness, everything. The voice in my head that says I'm not enough, it never stops, never quiets. Except here. Except with it. For the first time in years, I feel peace. That's not peace. That's surrender. Kelly, please." But Kelly had turned back to her carving, finishing the last symbol with bloody, frozen fingers. The moment she completed it, everything changed. The temperature plummeted. Wind rose from nowhere, whipping snow into blinding curtains, And from the direction of Boulder Pass came a sound, low, resonant, like a horn blown in a vast cathedral. The sound of something immense awakening. Kelly stood, arms spread, face turned toward the pass. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm ready. I've called you. I've invited you. Make me vast." The shadow came down from the pass like darkness taking physical form. Sarah saw it clearly this time. No intervening tent fabric or nighttime ambiguity. It was immense, 12 feet tall at least, gaunt to the point of skeletal, but somehow suggesting terrible strength. Its limbs were too long, jointed wrong. Its head was crowned with antlers, but not elk or deer. Something older, more primal. And its face. Its face was wrong in ways Sarah's mind couldn't process. Too many angles, geometry that shouldn't exist in 3 dimensions. Looking at it directly made her eyes hurt, made her thoughts fragment. But the worst part was the hunger. Sarah could feel it radiating from the thing like cold from a glacier. Not physical hunger, metaphysical. Hunger for being itself, for identity and self and all the small human things that made a person distinct. It wanted to consume Kelly Chen completely, leave nothing but hunger wearing Kelly's shape. The other rangers had fallen back, weapons drawn but useless. You couldn't shoot hunger, couldn't arrest winter. Sarah pulled out Joseph's charm, held it up between Kelly and the approaching shadow. The charm grew hot in her hand, painful. The shadow slowed, but didn't stop. "Kelly!" Sarah shouted over the wind. "Last chance, choose to stay human." But Kelly was walking toward the shadow, arms still spread, expression rapturous. "I choose vastness," she said. "I choose silence. I choose..." Sarah did the only thing she could think of. She tackled Kelly, bringing them both down into the snow. Joseph's charm fell from Sarah's hand, landing between them. And for just a moment the 3 of them were connected, Sarah, Kelly, and the Wendigo, looming over them both. Sarah felt it then, the full weight of what the Wendigo offered. Not just cessation of pain, but absolute release. No more responsibility, no more fear, no more self to burden. Just dissolution into hunger, into winter, into something immense and eternal. Part of her, the part that was tired, scared, inadequate, wanted it desperately. But another part, deeper and more stubborn, refused. Because Sarah Brennan was more than her fears, more than her inadequacies. She was the sum of 14 years in the wilderness, of every decision that had brought her here. She was her curiosity, her determination, her refusal to accept impossible as answer. And she wouldn't surrender that, wouldn't erase herself, not for any promise of peace. She looked up at the Wendigo, met its impossible gaze, and said one word. "No." The effect was immediate. The Wendigo recoiled, not physically, but essentially. The charm between Sarah and Kelly flared bright, painful even through closed eyes. And something broke, not completely, but enough. The connection severed. Kelly screamed, not in ecstasy now, but in loss. The rapture drained from her face, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror as she saw what she'd been about to do, what she'd been about to become. "No," she whispered. "No, I almost... God, Sarah, I almost..." The Wendigo was retreating, backing toward the pass. But its voice echoed in Sarah's mind, in Kelly's, in all of them. "You refuse now. But winter is long. I am patient. And you have seen me, understood me. That cannot be undone. Eventually, in the depths of cold or fear or despair, you will carve the symbols. You will speak the invitation. And I will be waiting." Then it was gone, dissolving into the wind and snow. The temperature rose fractionally. The oppressive weight lifted. But the promise remained, hovering like a threat that would never fully fade. They got Kelly down from the mountain, back to warmth and safety. She was hypothermic, frostbitten, traumatized but alive and human. The symbols carved into her palms would scar, permanent reminders of how close she'd come to dissolution. At the hospital, Kelly told her story haltingly, How she'd felt the pull. How the symbols from the elk site had gotten into her dreams, showing her what they meant. How she'd started to understand the transformation was possible, desirable even. How the voice in her head, the one that always told her she wasn't enough, had found an ally in the Wendigo's promise. It's still there, she admitted. The knowledge, the understanding. I know how to call it, know what it offers. And part of me. She couldn't finish, but Sarah understood. Part of her still wanted it, would always want it now. The knowledge couldn't be unlearned. Daniel Marsh and Robert Chen remained in the hospital, still transforming slowly despite being removed from the wilderness. The Wendigo's influence didn't need proximity. Once invited, it worked from within. The doctors were baffled. Psychiatric evaluation found them sane, just convinced, absolutely certain that what was happening to them was transcendence rather than destruction. Morrison ordered the closure of the northern section of Glacier National Park, Boulder Pass, Camas Creek, the upper Bowman Lake area. Officially, the reason was unstable winter conditions and elevated avalanche danger. Unofficially, it was quarantine. Keep people away from the source. Starve the Wendigo of new vessels. But Sarah knew it was temporary solution at best. The knowledge was spreading. Kelly had it now. Sarah had it. Joseph Three Bears' people had carried it for centuries, and the Wendigo itself was patient, eternal. It would wait through the closure, wait through the quarantine, wait through decades if necessary. Because winter always returned. The cold always came back. And humans, in their isolation and fear and inadequacy, would always seek transformation. Sarah submitted her final report 3 weeks after the incident. She documented everything. The physical evidence, the testimony, the folklore research, the encounter itself. Morrison read it, then locked it away. No official acknowledgement, no press release, just silence and secrets, the way these things always worked. But Sarah made copies, sent them to researchers, anthropologists, folklorists, people who might understand, people who might develop better responses. Because ignoring the Wendigo hadn't worked, trying to rationalize it away hadn't worked. And she suspected that trying to bind it or destroy it wouldn't work either. Maybe Joseph was right. Maybe coexistence was the only option. Respectful distance, careful boundaries, acknowledgement of mystery without trying to possess or destroy it. Let the cold places keep their monsters. Let the winter have its hunger. Just don't invite it in. Sarah requested a transfer 2 months later. Not because she was afraid, though she was, but because she knew she was compromised. The knowledge lived in her now. The understanding. On bad days, when the self-doubt crept in, when the inadequacy felt crushing, she'd catch herself thinking about the symbols, wondering if dissolution might be easier than persistence. She never carved them, never spoke the invitation. But the temptation remained, constant and patient, waiting for a moment of weakness that Sarah fought daily not to provide. Her last day at Glacier, she drove up to Logan Pass one final time. The high country was still locked in winter, would be for months yet. She stood in the parking lot looking north toward Boulder Pass, invisible behind intervening peaks. The wind was cold, the silence vast, and somewhere in that white distance, something immense and hungry waited. Not malicious, not evil, just what it was. Hunger given form, winter made manifest, the transformation that waited in the deep cold. Sarah touched the scar on her palm where she'd cut herself slightly grabbing the charm that night. A small mark, barely noticeable, but permanent. Some things once encountered could never be forgotten. Some knowledge once learned could never be unlearned. The Wendigo had touched her, and though she'd refused its offer, though she'd stayed human, she would carry its mark forever. She got in her truck and drove away from the mountains, but the cold came with her. The knowledge, the understanding, and the promise, whispered in a voice like winter wind. I am patient. I am eternal. And you have seen me. Eventually you will choose vastness. Eventually you will come home. Sarah didn't look back. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.